hi everyone, how's everyone doing? I'm Hanna, and today I will be talking to you about a very interesting, I hope, and light topic today. Okay, so I will be talking about attachment, and I will be talking about generally how attachment styles manifest into our relationships with our pets. And I will also include like a neurobiological or neuropsychological perspective into that. To basically see how our neurobiology is affected by these relationships that we have. So generally, I will of course talk to you first about the attachment and the attachment theory. I will brush over that very quickly. Then I will talk about the of course attachment to pets, and then I will include the neuro perspective into that. Okay, so let's talk about the attachment theory. We know that John Bowlby, he originated the attachment theory, and he was a psychoanalyst. And I would like to, I wanted to get a definition that he himself said that it's a strong. He said that it's a strong disposition to seek proximity and contact with a specific figure. So your primary, your attachment figure, and you do so especially when you're in a position where you feel threatened, where you feel unsafe, where you feel ill. Okay, and I want to stress on the fact that the attachment figure acts as a secure base and a safe haven for that, for the child. Okay, so what does that mean? So the child is able to explore away from the attachment figure, and also he knows that not only I can come back to that person, but I can also come back and I will feel safe and comfortable. Okay. He also proceeded to talk to us about how our early interactions, they tend to shape our attachment styles and our internal working models, which brings us to the classifications of the attachment styles, and basically what we expect of how other people would respond to us when we need help, or how we behave when we also need help. Okay. Okay. So some of us are secure, some of us are anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. So we know that. For the people who are secure, they're generally comfortable with being close, independent, and they also seek help when they are in distress. Anxious, they have high elevated levels of anxiety, especially when they're separated from their attachment figure, and they generally feel very. They tend to constantly want reassurance and cling on to the attachment figure. The avoidant, on the other hand, values their independence, they're very self-reliant, and they generally tend to suppress whatever they're feeling because they don't want to let their guard down, they don't want to look vulnerable in front of the person. Disorganized is a little bit of that, sometimes this and sometimes that, as we know. Okay, so let's get into pets. So if you have a pet, or if you guys have pets in general, how do they make you feel? Some of you can share that. Yes?
I would always be really happy when I was around them. Like when I come back, I had them when I was younger. When I come back from school, first thing I go do is see if my mom fed him, give him water. Like if he's well taken care of, it would make me really happy.
Okay. Anybody has anything else to say?
Okay, there's this kind of security and safety that knowing دايما when I go to my dog, compared to my cat, for example, I know that always when I go to my dog and he wants to cuddle and he wants pets and to play together. Compared to my cat where I don't feel safe, I might get bitten or scratched or not.
So you have both a cat and a dog?
I have
like your dog, you don't like your cat. That's interesting. Actually, Layla, you wanted to say?
I was gonna say see, my cat makes me feel seen, even though he doesn't play with me, but he just watches me all the time, and I know he knows I'm
I get that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk about first, before I get into how pets generally affect our mental well-being, they also affect our physical health, okay? And I will get into that in a more neurobiological perspective, but at the end of the presentation. So the study focused on how basically they benefit our physical health, so they've known to basically reduce our blood pressure and also increase longevity. So that's something, right? And then when it comes to our mental health, so much has been said about that. So again, one study talked about how they make us feel happy, as you guys said, secure, even they also increase our self-worth, and they also make us, they decrease our loneliness and our isolation. Now, I wanted to focus on the death of a companion animal, or the death of a pet. Why and why now? Because they have shown to actually affect us when they pass away, which shows that they have a positive effect on our mental well-being. So for the a person with an anxious attachment style, they've lost their pet, they could actually experience it. The study actually basically said that they experience the most grief and depression and anxiety after they've lost their pet. Whilst the avoidant, they do also experience these emotions. They feel grief, depression, but not as the person with an anxious attachment style. But I wanted to look further into that. Like I wanted to understand more on the avoidant person and how they basically deal with that. And it seems to like corroborate with what they would do with a human relationship, right? So they're still very self-reliant, and they don't like to like show their emotions and whatever they're feeling. As we said, they tend to like suppress, seeming like they didn't really like the relationship with their pets wasn't that important, but they do feel, of course. Yeah, that was nice. Okay. Now I want to talk about how our attachment styles tend to manifest into our into like from human relationships to pet-human relationships. So, okay, I wanted to ask you first. What do you think? So, do you think that a person with a secure attachment style with a human would have the same like a secure attachment style with an animal pet, or an avoidant would have مثلا an anxious? Like, I want to know your thoughts about that. Yes?
I think it could be a rather corrective emotional experience, because people always say, in whatever, my dad always says, الكلب is the only one not so maybe it's different because for pets you always know how they're going to react, and they're always positive, they're always happy to have you. Maybe it's rather something that would encourage you to behave differently, even if you have an anxious or avoidant attachment style.
That's interesting. We're going to see that. Yes.
I think mostly people with insecure attachment style tend to have a secure base with their pets, because sometimes they find
the anxious and the avoidant.
Yes. So I think they find the warmth or the love or the, like, for example, any kind of feelings or emotion they like in their human-to-human interactions and their pets. Sometimes they have secure attachment with their pet, while their main attachment style might be insecure. I noticed this in some of my friends who have pets. It's very interesting.
Okay. So let's see what the research said. So I looked at an initial study that basically looked at the person with an anxious attachment style, and they basically like. They would have also an anxious attachment style with their pets usually. So things like what? They would worry a lot about their pet's safety, so they would worry if the pet would run away, the pet would die, something would happen to them. They would also always want to reassurance and to know that their pet loves them, right? And they would feel really angry. So imagine like a person with an anxious attachment style, how would they feel if their pet was sitting in their sibling's room, for example, and they don't want to sit with them? It's really frustrating, right? So basically what we know is that people with an anxious attachment style, they could have an anxious relationship also with their pets. Now, okay, so for the avoidant, however, it's more interesting, and you'll see this now. So they would also show that they feel discomfort when they show physical contact. They don't really like to. They don't tend to seek their pet when they're in need or when they're in distress. And they don't really like to have them around all the time. So like if they're working or something, like people usually like to have their pet sitting next to them, and I'm one of these people, but that wouldn't really be the behavior that they would prefer. However, I wanted to look more into that, and I wanted to see, because of course, for me, an avoidant attachment style is really interesting, because they feel that they feel the emotions that the anxious feels, but how do they portray them, or how do they express them? So I found other studies actually have found that they may also express worriness. So an avoidant may also express an anxious attachment style with their pets, which is really interesting. And then I looked further into this, and I wanted to explore more on that and why. Can you actually go to the slide out? Yes. No. Yes, that. Oh, yes. I wanted to explore why Okay, so this was really interesting. So I looked at this study, which basically looked at people who were they were couples, right, in a relationship, and they wanted to see what their attachment styles and how it manifests into their human-pet relationships. So at first they started to talk about how if someone is strongly attached to their pet, there's a possibility that it's because of a lack of a secure human attachment. And that made so much sense to me. So think about it, if you have an insecure attachment style with, for example, your partner, wouldn't it be easier for you to have a secure attachment style with your pet, right? So pets are, these were some of the testimonies of the participants that they asked, and they generally said that it was a less complicated relationship, having a relationship with a pet, which made it easier to have a secure relationship with your pet. Can we go back? Sorry. I think back one. Yes. Yes, also, okay. And then I looked at another study which was really interesting, and it also sort of matched with what I was just saying, is that both the anxious and the avoidant were able to have secure attachments with their pets, even though they do not have these kinds of relationships with whatever their partners, people around them, their attachment figures, and so on. I wanted to look at the secure attachment style because all the studies seem to focus on anxious avoidant. So I was wondering what's going on there. And I managed to find a study that just basically said that they tend to have a secure attachment with their pets as well. So they would feel grief and stress when their pets had passed away. They would go to their pets when they need the help or when they feel like they need the emotional support. They would also express the stress if their pet, for example, was away from them. So it was like a normal secure attachment. There wasn't anything that was deviant, like we found. But what about the neuroscience or the neurobiological perspective? This was very interesting to me. I really like biology. I didn't find what I had expected to find. Like I was looking for serotonin release and stuff like that, but I didn't find that. What I found is that studies, for example, showed that your cortisol levels, which is it's a neuropeptide. Neuropeptides are between your neurotransmitters and your hormones, so they're somewhere in between, and it is released when you're stressed, right? So less of that, more of oxytocin, the love hormone, so there's more bonding, okay? So you can see how your body, it's like a cycle, okay? So you're staying with your pet, you're playing with your pet, whatever, and then your cortisol levels are lower, your oxytocin is higher, and then you feel a greater bond, and then you continue to do that, and then you see how it goes, right? So that was very interesting for me to find out. I can go back. Yes. Okay. Another really interesting thing was I wanted to look at the amygdala activation, because we know that the amygdala is really, it's part of your limbic system in the brain, and we know that the amygdala is responsible for a lot of things, but mainly we tend to say emotions, fear. We tend to say flight, fight, or freeze response, like Leila had told us. And they looked at the anxious people with anxious attachment style when they were exposed to negative social interactions. What do I mean by that? For example, if they're exposed to an interaction where they were rejected in some way, how that would register in their brain. So they found that their amygdala was heightened. Okay, it was really activated because again they get really, really stressed and or frustrated in these kinds of situations. And for the avoidant, their amygdala was expressed lower activation when they were exposed to positive social interactions. Okay, so where they had to feel vulnerable, for example, at some point. And then adding on to that, and what I would like to conclude with, I found this really interesting study that looked at human relationships as trauma modulators in children. So what they basically said is that when they found that basically as a child, you've been through a traumatic experience, they found that having a pet actually really improves, not only regulates your emotions and builds resilience, but by doing that, it actually promotes brain health. Okay, so if we can see how, it's amazing to see how what you see from the outside, like your emotions changing, you're being resilient, you're going through your trauma, and whatever is happening from the outside, it actually reflects back on your biology and it changes your brain. Right? And we always like to hear that, not always, but some of us really like to hear that, like to make sure that it's biologically based, and that's really, really interesting. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, and then I also want to say that a lot of the studies usually ended with saying that, oh, we should think about how we can use animals in therapy then, and how we can help them through, as the study found, through their trauma and so on. So that was really interesting for me because I think we do that, but I'm not really sure how the studies like how extensive it is through the research. But I don't know like if you've heard of something called equine therapy, where they use horses through therapy and bonding. Yeah, so that's really interesting for us to think about how we can use that in therapy to actually help clients. So I just wanted to go beyond that and to explain to you how that would work.